And I just wanted to thank Corey and Lisa for bringing this series to us. I'm looking forward to tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. So I need to say how grateful we are to our teacher for this series, Lisa Ellison, formerly Kogan, who served as the Women's League Director of Education and Program from 2003 to 2017. During that time, she helped to create educational and programmatic innovations reflective of the organization's longstanding mission. Since her retirement and moved to Atlanta, and then moved to Atlanta a few months ago in another spot, Lisa continues to teach and lecture on subjects near and dear to her heart, one of which is the scope and importance of women's contributions to contemporary Jewish history. Tonight's topic is, I'm trying to get the view set. Okay, I don't know. All right. I'm trying to get the view. So
what would you let? So you're spotlighted?
Yeah, so whoever's speaking is spotlighted.
So right now you're spotlighted for everybody.
That's great. Tonight's topic, a century of activism, good deeds, and spirit. In this session, we will focus on Women's League's activism throughout the century: Israel, reproductive rights, feminism, egalitarianism, and the environment, as well as peer into what the future might look like. So, Lisa, I turn it over to you.
Am I unmuted now? Am I unmuted?
Now you're good.
Okay.
Okay.
I can't find my watch anywhere, Corey, so you're going to have to be a good timekeeper for me, okay? Since I returned from my road trip, I have not been able to locate my watch, and I can't. My phone, I have to keep uploading it every time I want to check and once I go into the screen. So anyway, just give me 15 minutes in. Corey has a great sense of humor, for those of you who don't know her real well, but she's really a great sense of humor. And early on, she kept hawking me for my biography. And I just hate these. I don't know if you guys remember these conventions. Do you remember when Marjorie Saulson did a 25-minute introduction to Ismar Shorsh at one of the conventions? I mean, that was one of my great things, was to cut down the introductions. Corey, you don't still have the second bio that I sent you, do you? That you said you don't really want me to read this, do you? I figure it's the last session. What the hell, But too bad, because it was pretty funny. But she refused to read it.
That's because you taught me well, Lisa. That's because you taught me well.
I identified myself as the illegitimate love child of two really very ignoble people. So anyway, before I begin, I'm going to do the thank yous, because, as you know, I get caught up in the moment, and I'm sorry. And I would just like to also do a few thank yous. First of all, I want to thank all of you who have come to these sessions. Many of you have been to all of them, or a good part of them, and I really respect and admire your fortitude for sticking this out. And I hope that you did get as much out of it, actually, and very honestly, as I did in creating these programs. And I have to say, even though it was harrowing up to the last minute getting the PowerPoints done, I loved every minute of doing this, because doing research is one of the things that keeps my blood moving, the blood flowing through my veins. So that being said, I would like to thank, in addition to all of you, I want to thank Julia and Rabbi Ellen, both of them, for their support, their ongoing support of this project, which is it's critical to have that support from the top. I just want to do a shout out to, I don't know, many of you know this, but I have since COVID, I have reconnected with 3 of my very close high school friends. And the name of we went to Henry Ford High School together in Detroit. And believe it or not, the name of our high school football team was the Henry Ford Trojans. And so we call ourselves the Trojan Women. And 2 of my 3 Trojan sisters are here tonight, one of whom many of you know is Linda Boxer, who has had many, many, many hats and is now the International Northeast Region President. After she finished committing hara-kiri when she was her synagogue president. And the other is my good friend Barbara Hillman, who is not a member of Women's League, but in her own right is a very fine pianist. And she's very active in the NCJW in Detroit. But mostly I would like to leave my final thanks to Corey, whose indomitable spirit and her intellectual curiosity is a great goad to me. And when I just want to sit back and watch, binge watch slow horses on television, Corey is on the phone nudging me on. And I just want to thank you, Corey. This would not have, very honestly, would not have been possible without all of the heroic archival work that you have done. And it really was heroic what you have done. And I'm in great admiration and much gratitude to you for that. So that being said, I am now going to move on to a really interesting topic. And I have to say, I was talking to Corey this afternoon. I had to cut out, when I got to the resolution of Women's League, I had to cut out 90% of the material I had prepared for it, because I realized if I was just talking about resolutions, we would be talking about this until Tisha B'Av. So anyway, the stuff almost writes itself, I have to say. So that being said, I am going to open up and you're not going to have to look at me anymore, but I am going to put up my PowerPoint. Oh, am I going to have to do screen share, or can you see this, Corey?
Julia, can you make Lisa co-host?
I can, hang on.
Thank you. So she can share her PowerPoint. Thank you.
Do I have to sign into anything, Julia?
No, I will put it on, hang on. Okay, you should be able to share now.
Okay. Got it? Can you see everyone?
No, just you.
Ooh, All right, just a minute.
Did you click the share button?
No, I did not. Hold on, just a minute. I gotta get out of this thing here.
It doesn't
Oh,
say
I
that
asked you if I
Lisa is
had
a
to share.
co-host.
So
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to,
I just allowed anyone to share. So it doesn't
I see.
say you're a co-host, but you can still share.
So
Okay,
click
all right.
share, Lisa.
I know, I'm gonna click it right now. I gotta find it here. Here it is.
There we go.
All
Good.
right, now what I want to do is, hold on. I want to do something here.
From beginning.
I know. I've
There you
got
go.
some, all right.
There you go.
Is all the stuff gone off the top?
Yeah,
It
you're
doesn't
fine.
make, it doesn't make any difference. Is it good? Okay.
Yep.
All right. Okay. All right, here we go. Oh boy.
Yep.
Okay. So the title that I gave for this is Her Deeds Praise Her in the Gates, which many of you will recognize is from Eshet Chayil. It's interesting. It's not going anywhere. There we go.
There you go.
Okay. How can I get rid of this thing off the side here?
You're okay, Lisa. We're
Okay.
seeing it
Okay.
okay.
I just hope it's not going to impede my being able to see my screen.
Okay.
So anyway, what I have decided to do is I have broken this up. As you know, we're going to talk about activism. And so what I did was I have broken this up into various categories, and I'm not dealing with this chronologically. And I also want to say the caveat, although Corey did this introduction, that I was going to be dealing with these issues for the century. Actually, we only have resolutions that go back to the 50s, and even then there weren't a lot. And as the century progressed, there were more and more resolutions that were enacted at the conventions, the biennial conventions. And and there are many of you, I'm sure, that sat through these conventions, especially back in the 80s and the 90s. It was before my time, but I've heard stories of from women who were at these conventions that these resolution sessions could be incredibly hair-raising, with women fighting over not only the substance of the resolutions, of which there was very robust discussion, but even the wording and sometimes they would fight over, whether to say amiable or convivial or whatever. They could go on and fight for hours and hours just about the use of a single word. Nevertheless, notwithstanding sometimes some of the resolution sessions that could sometimes be trivialized by attention to minutia, by and large, these resolution sessions were very, very important, because what they did was they established what was going to be essentially the corporate response of the organization, or the position that the organization would take on a particular issue. And I have to say, I want to thank Corey and Debbie Goldich. Well, Debbie was on the call, but Corey did the interview. And I would like to encourage you, for those of you who did not know Bernice Balter, who was the executive director from 1979 through 2000 and blah, blah, something. She was a really an extraordinary executive director, and she came in actually as she was the first to professionalize the position of executive director, and she was brought in. She didn't even have the title at first as an executive director. She was called the executive assistant, and she came in with a political science background. And so what that essentially did was that informed Bernice and what she was going to do with Women's League with regard to what was going to be their portfolio in the world. And I would like to encourage all of you to go and listen to this interview, which is 45 minutes, where Bernice gives this just remarkable history of, Women's League. It's insightful, it's analytic, and she also talks about, a lot about public policy positions that Women's League took in those years. And so what I'm going to do is, because that was such an important part of the identity of Women's League for a good number of decades, I'm going to focus on some of the world affair and resolutions that really were part of the identity of Women's League for Conservative Judaism. And so you can see here that let's see. Oh boy. Is there, I want to, oh, here we go. Okay. So during the last half of the 20th century, as I said, this is principally when it was really the heyday of the resolutions. And for a number of years, under the tutelage, really the ingenuity of Bernice Balter, Women's League, and there are probably some of you who actually attended these, she developed these World Affair conferences that were in Washington, D.C. I don't know how many of you are on this call who went, but these were very, very ambitious programs where women would go to Washington for 2.5 days. All of the events would be, just like our conventions, would be planned well ahead of time. And they would go and they would meet with various legislators, and they would go to the embassies, and they would go and talk policy with various functionaries in the federal government. And they were highly, highly successful. Bernice said in her interview that when they would put out there that they didn't have a website in those days, when they would put out there that the Capitol Conference was going to take place, all the women would be signed up within 24 hours, and they'd have to close down registration because they were so popular. And as I said, they had these every 2 years. And they were not only highly choreographed, but they were deeply thoughtful, as I said, because that was, the sort of the way Bernice operated. And so she said, for example, one of the things that she was told after the first conference, her contact there was a rabbi, David Saperstein, who worked in Washington, D.C. for many years. And he told Bernice after the first conference, you people can't stay at hotels, these hotels outside of Washington, D.C. You're going to have to stay in DC because the government people who are going to come to speak to you are not going to schlep outside of Washington, D.C. So you're going to have to do it in the city, which meant that they would then have to bring in a kosher caterer into the city, into wherever the hotel where they were staying. And what happened was, as Bernice said in her interview, even though they were extremely popular and well attended, and women really looked forward to going to them, they actually had to stop the programs because it became just too costly for women to stay at hotels in Washington, D.C. and bring in kosher caterers, which is a shame. It just shows how outside forces can sometimes sabotage even the most well-conceived programs. But the World Affairs conferences, for those of you who went and who are on this call, I'm sure many of you will speak very fondly and very highly of them. Another one of the ongoing programs, and of course, I'm sure you all can appreciate how controversial this is now because, the United Nations in general. But Women's League since 1952 have been accredited non-governmental observers, called in the trade an NGO. This was a representative from Women's League who would go and sit in the General Assembly. She would get to know a lot of the individuals at the United Nations, and they were very involved in even lobbying for issues that were of importance to Jews in the United States. And so, as you can see here, they were involved and they were effective in a number of areas at the United Nations: human conditions, human rights, genocide, disarmament, ecology, UNICEF, world hunger, protection of women and children, the homeless and the displaced. As you can imagine, during the Zionism is racism controversy at the United Nations. Gloria Fischel, who was our longtime government NGO there, was very, very vocal in advocating for the Jews in the United States. So now let's talk about some of these resolutions that were passed by at the conventions. One of the very, very that appeared a lot in the resolutions was the issue of immigration. And what I'm going to do is I want to show you, because you are going to see, as you will see in a number of these resolutions, some quite amazing, a remarkable change in either the focus, the substance, or even the resolutions of some of these, the results of some of these resolutions. But on the issue of immigration, for example, And I put a number of these all together because they focus on essentially the same issue. As you can see, in 1952, 1954, 1956, 58, 60, 62, 64, there were continued resolutions for the repeal of the Immigration and Nationality Act. And as you can see, identified that was what is known as the McCarran-Walter Act. It was passed in 1952. It was a very, very, um, I would say, a very prohibitive act that you can see that continued to uphold the national origins quota system that had been established by the Immigration Act of 1924 and continued to reinforce this very controversial system of immigrant selection. Why this was so important after 1952, I'm sure you can surmise, because this is where context fits in. This is almost immediately following the Holocaust, where there are tens of thousands of Holocaust survivors who are looking to come to the United States. And because of these very harsh, they continued to be, and almost a renewal of these very harsh the Immigration Act of 1924, another repressive act established in 1952, Women's League was very concerned that many of these Holocaust survivors who were looking to get out of Europe could get into the United States, which continued to be a challenge for many of them. And so at each convention from 1952 to 1964, Women's League continued to raise the issue of how important it was to repeal this very harsh Immigration Act. And then if you can see, so that was a focus for Women's League in the 1950s through the 60s. And as I said, a contextual understanding of that is because this was immediately following the Holocaust, when so many survivors were looking to come to the United States. But if we move forward to 1982, we are going to see a very different kind of focus on immigration. From 1980, 2006 to 2017, you are going to see a shift in the focus of immigration. They are still going to, this is now going to support the Refugee Act. However, what is going to happen is now it's going to reflect that American Jews are no longer concerned, because relaxation of immigration possibilities for survivors of the Holocaust have been relaxed, but now the government is beginning to feel the pinch of immigration refugees coming from many other countries. And so now what Women's League is going to do is going to focus basically on immigrants of other immigrant groups. So now in 1980, you see they're going to support the Refugee Act, which is going to call for greater equitability and humanity to these waves of immigration who are coming from Vietnam, who are coming from South America, many of whom are going to be coming from the Soviet Union. And so now Women's League is seeking to be other directed. In 2006, while they passed a resolution that is going to reiterate the core values of America as a welcoming place, it is nevertheless now going to talk about the support of border protection policies, which are going to become, as you can see, is going to be an escalating problem for in the United States. And so what Women's League understands is, while, you know, immigration continues to be an ongoing problem, that there needs to be border protection, but the protection needs to be humane. Also in 2006, at that point, Women's League was advocating that hardworking immigrants who are not documented, they didn't use the term at that point, should have legal and available options for citizenship. So Women's League is now beginning to grasp on what's going to become a very important problem in the United States. And by 2017, they are going to even escalate their language, and they are going to confirm that the United States does in fact have the right to secure borders and an obligation, the terminology, to protect citizens from violence. However, these immigration policies should not be bigoted and prejudicial, that they should be equitably dispensed. And they also, again, even though they understood that there needs to be greater protection at the borders, that they nevertheless need to support immigrants and refugees with laws and policies that are consistent with American values of inclusivity and humane principles. And so you can imagine how this policy, and I suspect that if you had a resolution session on this now, and we were talking about this recently, Julia and Corey and Rabbi Ellen and I were talking about this recently, about how many of these issues that were once a slam dunk for Women's League. Of course you have to support immigrants. Of course you have to have borders that are going to be open and accessible. These issues now have become, just as the United States has become much more fractured and fragmented in terms of their understanding and approach to the immigration issue. So are women in Women's League. And I'm sure that there are regional variations of how people feel about immigration. So it's going to be difficult now for Women's League even to embrace publicly a policy on immigration that is going to reflect the values and opinions of all members of Women's League. I'm not sure on this issue whether Women's League will be able to come to any kind of and I'm certainly open to a discussion about this, but whether in the present day, in the present political climate, if even Women's League can come to some kind of unanimity on how immigration should be dealt with. But you can begin to see that even in the 1980s through 2017, the Women's League was beginning to have a different focus on immigration policy. Similarly, you're going to see again a shift in Women's League, in Women's League's position on Israel. So as you can see, from 1974, 1982, and 1990, the Women's League took the unequivocal position that the PLO is a terrorist organization, that PLO principals should not have been allowed to speak at the United Nations. The United Nations should not allow any terrorist organization to represent itself or to speak publicly. They reiterated that again in 1982, that the PLO is a terrorist organization, but at that point, they're beginning to soften a little bit, because they also urge that members are able and willing to differentiate on law-abiding residents who are Palestinian Arabs living in Israel, whose rights are affirmed by the Camp David Accords. So you can see again, this comes after 1978 when the Camp David Accords were signed. And now there is going to be a greater openness towards the acceptance of Arab Palestinian residents. And so what Women's League did, it sort of split the baby here. They said, we are going to respect the rights of law-abiding residents, Palestinian Arabs in Israel, but we differentiate them from those PLO terrorists who are still committed to Israel's destruction. And then by 1990, as the United States is ramping up its position towards the PLO and is actually softening it, the Women's League amends its resolution of 1982 and suggests that PLO activities should be monitored, as is the Congress of the United States, and that there should be some relaxation of acceptance of the PLO in Israel. And then this gets even more remarkable when you read these resolutions and you can see the evolution of positions. In 1994, now this is after Oslo, they accept the mutual recognition, and this is Women's League, their resolution, accept the mutual recognition agreement signed on September 9th, 1993, that Israel recognizes the PLO, and the PLO recognizes Israel and renounces terrorism. The PLO also nullifies those parts of its charter calling for Israel's destruction and calls for an end to the Intifada. And then again, you can imagine how contemporary politics might, come in and look at this resolution. This was pretty remarkable. In 2004, a Women's League resolution continued with its strong involvement and support of the state of Israel and the peace process. And are you ready for this? The support for the adoption of a two-state solution, which secures the borders in Israel, accompanied by renunciation of terrorism by the Palestinian Authority. So in 2004, Women's League resolutions actually confirmed their acceptance of the idea of a two-state solution in Israel. I can't even imagine how this would come up at a resolution session at Women's League today. I can only, I wouldn't even try to figure out how that might come out. Okay, reproductive rights. Again, we're going to see a gradual shift, not just gradual, and it's very nuanced, but you can again begin to see how these issues in the resolutions with women are going to become, they're going to become much more fraught, and women are going to have to, they're going to get away from, just, previous positions and begin to either make them a little more, a little softer, or sometimes a little more nuanced. But in 1976, Women's League, a resolution unabashedly acknowledged that all women had the freedom of choice, and they opposed any legislation that deprived women of federally funded access to health care, i.e. reproductive rights and even abortion. This is after the Roe decision, when Roe became the law of the land. In 1976, they again, but you're going to see some kind of relaxation. All women should have access to birth control. But here I found this really interesting, not exactly a condition to that, but one of the parts of that resolution said that while Women's League does acknowledge that all women should have the right to birth control and family planning, nevertheless, I don't think they use the word nevertheless, concerns about ZPG, zero population growth, which was very, very popular in the mid-70s, had implications for the Jewish population growth in the United States. And that when Jews, and just caution that when women talk about birth control, one of the things that needs to be taken into consideration is, what is the Jewish population growth, and are we going to fall below that which was previously sustained, and how detrimental will that be to Jews in the United States and elsewhere. So already beginning to see there's a kind of before, we say uniformly all birth control is good. Nevertheless, we need to be mindful of what the implications are socially demographically for Jews if we do engage in ZPG. And then by 1980, they're already beginning to understand that, the issue is not so black and white. And so they came out very forcefully with the statement that the abortion of the fetus is not the taking of an actual life. And what you are seeing here actually in that terminology is that you are beginning to see with the right to lifers who are already talking about abortion as the taking of a human life. And so what this resolution says is it's not the taking of an actual life, but represents the destruction of a potential life. And while women have the right to engage in an abortion, it should not be taken lightly. So already they're beginning to see that the abortion issue is not quite as easy as it was initially thought to be. In 2012, they had a very robust resolution session where they talked about how women should be mindful of biblical and rabbinic understandings of abortion, and they presented a number of statements from the Bible and from the Talmud about abortion, and when it's accessible, when it's not. And so essentially what this resolution is saying is that abortion, while legal and halachically acceptable, nevertheless must be done in accordance with what are Jewish values. Nevertheless, they continue to support access for all women to make their own decisions, and they urge members to support the government, any kind of governmental interference in women's health issues. And finally, this one, not finally, there are many, by the way, in the resolutions, many resolutions on reproductive rights. This is only a representative selection, but I think an important one. And here in 2014, they passed a resolution that WLCJ should join an amicus brief, which is a collective brief by numbers of organizations to the government, supporting contraception coverage that was mandated by the ACA. And I'm sure many of you will probably remember the very, very, I think there was a tremendous amount of animosity and discussions about whether corporations and businesses should be forced to comply with paying for birth control for people working in their organizations. And this was a very fraught political issue. But at that point, in 2014, Women's League felt it was appropriate to join in the amicus brief that the ACA and its mandate for all women being covered across the board for birth control information and medications or devices or whatever. As you know, this now has become much more of a fraught issue even now. So that is, a good, I think those three areas are very representative of quite robust resolutions, discussions, intelligent, thought out. Sometimes, they got pretty hairy, some of these discussions from what I understand. Nevertheless, it demonstrates an organization that takes its role seriously, takes its place in the world seriously, and they understand that these actions at the conventions are very important to its own self-identity. So now we're going to move on to an area that is near and dear to my life, as is, I'm sure, many of you. And you can imagine how Women's League is going to really be, I think, in the forefront of the egalitarianism in religious life in American Judaism. One of my favorite midrashim is, oops, wait a minute. Hold on. Why isn't it moving? Oop. Okay. This is from the Talmud. This is an Agadah from the Talmud from Masechet Menachot. The ikar of this is that that Moses is on high, and he finds God sitting in tying crowns on the letters of the Torah. And Moses says to God, Master of the universe, who is preventing you from giving the Torah without these additions? And so he's saying, why, who's stopping you from giving the Torah and explaining and providing the Torah for the people? And God says to him, well, there's a man who's destined to be born after several generations, and Akiva ben Yosef is his name. He's destined to derive from each and every thorn of these crowns mounds upon mounds of halachot. It is for the sake that the crowns must be added to the letters of the Torah. So Moses, you can imagine, is sort of scratching his head. And he says, well, Master of the universe, show him to me. And God says to him, return behind you. And Moses goes and he sits at the end of the 8th row in Rabbi Akiva's study hall. And Rabbi Akiva, now you can imagine, Moshe Rabbeinu is there at the back of the hall, and he's listening to Akiva talk. And he, this is my drosh on this drosh. And he, and Moses turns to the guy next to him and says, who is that guy up there? And what's he talking about? And the guy looks at Moses and he says, well, this is the Torah of our great Rabbi Moshe Rabbeinu. And Moses sort of scratches his head and he says, that's my Torah. And so then he, he's very befuddled. And he says, and finally, when Rabbi Akiva speaks on a matter, another matter, and then the student turns to him and says, where did you get that from? And he says, from my great master, from Moshe Rabbeinu. Then Moses understood that the law was there, but the law was there for purposes of interpretation, but that also that the Torah that was sent to them had been received and was in the right hands. So in other words, what this Agadah is talking about a number of things. It's talking about how the Torah, as it was understood by Moses, might have changed. Nevertheless, the change is good. And so with that, we're going to move on to the topic of Jewish feminism. And as you know, second wave feminism, first wave feminism really began with the suffragists. The second wave feminism began, you could, if you want to find an text, I would look at Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique that she wrote in 1963, where she talked about the problem that has no name, that is the notion that women left at home were bored silly, and had they aspired to the role of domestic goddesses, one day they look around and they say, is this all that there is? And as this feminine mystique picked up, Jewish women also began to understand that within Jewish life, the question of being on the perimeter, on the outside looking in, on the outskirts, basically disenfranchised, would look at themselves and say, is this all there is? It actually began, I would say, proto-feminism began early on in the 20th century. There are a couple of very important, this was a letter that was sent to that Henrietta Zold sent to Chaim Peretz, who offered, when her mother died, to say Kaddish for her, to say Kaddish on Henrietta's behalf for her mother. And what Henrietta says to, she writes to him And she writes to him and says, I'm very, very grateful that you've offered to do this for me, for my mother. And it's beautiful that and I'll never forget that you did this. And she goes on and she thanks and she says, but then she goes on to say, but the Kaddish is very meaningful to me as a survivor publicly. And I have to do this for my family. I believe that the elimination of women from such duties was never intended by our law and custom. Women were freed from positive duties when they could not perform them, but not when they could. It was never intended. If they could perform them, their performance of them should not be considered as valuable and valid as when one of the male sex performed them. And of the Kaddish, I feel sure that this is particularly true. And Henrietta Zold is actually, what she's doing is she is responding. It's interesting. She takes this argument. She says, it doesn't say that we're forbidden to do it. It just shows that we were not intended to do it. Oh boy, sorry about that. I don't know what I did here. Sorry about this. It says here that I'm not forbidden from doing it. It's just that I don't have to do it, which became one of the arguments for feminists, that women are not prohibited from doing many of these undertaking many halachic actions. They're not prohibited from doing it, but that they are exempted from doing it. And what Henrietta Zold is saying is, I am choosing to do this, and I'm going to do this. And that was a very remarkable action. Another important, I think, strike for feminism early on. Judith Kaplan, the daughter of Mordechai Kaplan, had a bat mitzvah in 1923. The first in the United States. And Mordechai Kaplan said, there's no reason why my daughter cannot have a bat mitzvah. And that was, as far as I know, the first in the United States. Here I found this in an interesting, Corey Schneider. I see this as sort of a bookend to the Henrietta Zold article, the Henrietta Zold letter about the recitation of Kaddish. And what Corey does is, it's a very, very fine article that she writes in CJ. And she talks about what it was like for her to recite Kaddish for her father, and all of the steps that she went through as a young woman, where it had not been commanded of her, where she didn't know what she was doing. And she just decided on her own over the year that she was going to undertake this very important commitment to recite Kaddish for her father. And in a really very lovely, and I think a very insightful way, she talks about her gradual the evolution in her personally, in her Jewish journey, as she undertook this commitment of reciting Kaddish for her father. And I think that this is a really very nice bookend to the Henrietta Zold piece. So Corey, a little shout out to you and your buddy Henrietta. But you can find this on the archives.
Thank you, Lisa. And I just time check, it's 8:20.
Okay. Here we have, this became the real call to action by women in the second wave of Jewish feminists. This was a group of women who called themselves, ironically, Ezrat Nashim. Now, as you know, Ezrat Nashim is it's a pun on what was known as the women's section in synagogues, where women were kept separate from men, where they had their own section of prayer, and where they're separated from men. And so but Ezrat Nashim also sees themselves as this is now a new form of women's section. And so what these women did was they had a call to action of all of those things that they were going to demand of the conservative movement. And they decided that they were going to draw up this table of of demands for change, and they were going to present them at the 1972 Rabbinical Assembly. And they take this call to action to the Rabbinical Assembly and say, we would like to get up and make a formal presentation about this. And you can see that of the things that they wanted women to have greater role in their synagogues. They wanted women to be given aliyot. They wanted women to be counted in the minyan. They wanted women to be represented, become a dot in witnesses in Jewish law. That women should be allowed to initiate divorce, and so they come up with this full presentation of demands, basically, that they're going to present to the Rabbinical Assembly, and the Rabbinical Assembly says pass, and they did not want them to do that. So they were not prepared to even approach the subject. So Ezrat Nashim, undaunted by this rebuff, went to WLCJ and said, we would like at your convention to make a presentation of our, basically what you would call a call to arms. And WLCJ said, "Geh gesundter hey," and let them make this presentation at their convention, which they did. And at this convention, at the 1972 convention, over and above the fact that Ezrat Nashim had their first public acknowledgement and representation before, you know, I think most appropriately the most important conservative Jewish women's organization, probably one of the most, at that point, one of the most important Jewish women's organizations in the United States. They made their presentation, and at that convention, a number of very interesting things happened. For example, at this 1972 convention, women, for the first time, did their own Torah reading. Up until that point, the Torah reading, laning for Torah, was done by rabbis and other husbands of women who were at the convention, but women did not read Torah at their own convention. And here you can see even some of the, I'm sure some of you will remember, from left to right, actually, all of them are now at the great yeshiva in the sky. But Evelyn Henkind, Edja Arts, and Ruth Perry, all were involved, took over the mantle of Torah reading for the first time at the Women's League Convention. Also, you can see here that Leora Fishman at that convention, member of Ezrat Nashim, demonstrated to women for the first time how a woman could put on tefillin. I'm sure that was a huge shock to all of the women there to see this woman up there putting tefillin on her arm. Also at this convention, undaunted by any of what the Rabbinical Assembly said about the issues raised by Ezrat Nashim, they had a straw vote for the ordination of women rabbis. This is 1972, folks. This is just the beginning. And 65% of the women at that convention were already in favor of the ordination of women rabbis. There was an even larger number of women in the straw vote who thought that women should be allowed to serve as synagogue presidents, for example. So already Women's League was, they were moving in the direction of the full acceptance, the demand for parity in the synagogue, and the acceptance of women as their spiritual leaders, which was pretty remarkable. This was 1972, as you might know, was also the first year, was the year that Sally Priesand was ordained by Hebrew Union College. The first reform, actually not the first, but she's sort of acknowledged as the first rabbi ordained in the United States. First official one. So now that Women's League has embarked upon this project of egalitarianism, they are now going to involve themselves deeply in the creation of all kinds of new rituals that are going to basically make many of these rights that had been not precluded, but had been very much diminished for women. One of them, and probably one of the most important and the most enduring, was the creation of the Simchat Bat ceremony. As many of you know, especially those of you who grew up with little brothers or sons, even once upon a time when babies were born, and when babies were born, they had a great big party for the boys after 8 days, a great big huge party. And for the girls, the day, maybe the Shabbat after, or one of the closest, a Torah reading day closest to when she was born, the father would go to the synagogue, he would get an aliyah, he would give the baby a name, and there would be a little l'chaim afterwards of maybe some honey cake and some schnapps or something. But there was in the even in mid-century, little boys were celebrated in a very robust way, and little girls, the birth of little girls, gained hardly any recognition. But with the creation of the Simchat Bat ceremonies, the first of which was created by Rabbi Nina Beth Carden, one of the first women to be ordained by the Jewish Theological Seminary, she created a very, very comprehensive, interesting, and creative numbers of different kinds of ceremonies that could be performed at home or in the synagogues for little girls, so that when little girls were born, that they would be afforded the same kind of kavod and kudos as the birth of a little boy. That is one of the ceremonies that Women's League absolutely advocated for, and the Simchat Bat package has been sold. Thousands and thousands and thousands of these have been sold over years for people looking to have these kinds of ceremonies for their daughters. I don't know if any of you remember this, but this was a slide from my last presentation. I just had to put this in. I got so many comments about this. The convention speakers up until, the 1990s, who are the convention speakers? They were all men, all men. And by the time we are beginning to see now, by the 1990s, a real cadre of women scholars and now women rabbis. All of a sudden, now Women's League has said, why do we need to continue to bring men in to be our speakers when we have all of these talented women out there? And Women's League has been unflagging in its, I have to say, unflagging in its support of the female scholars and rabbis who bring every day great learning and great kavod to the organization. And by the way, for many years, following the exit of Bernice Balter, the discussion of a new executive director for the organization, Rhonda Kahn, who was my fellow the communications director, and I both, as soon as when Bernice left, both of us began very vociferously advocating for an executive director who was a rabbi. And we said it's really important. The Federation of Jewish Men's Clubs has a rabbi as its head, as its executive director. The Rabbinical Assembly does. The United Synagogue does, and Women's League for Conservative Judaism. Now that we have so many very talented women rabbis out there, this should be our executive director. And finally, thank God, Women's League was able to hire its very first and hopefully very long enduring executive director, Rabbi Ellen Wallens-Fields, who has brought also, as was expected, great kavod and learning to the organization. So hats off to you, Ellen. A little too late, but but never too late. Another one of the very important contributions that Women's League made was the establishment of the Kolot Bikdusha Society, which now that you had women learning to read Torah and learning to lane, they established a society of women who were acknowledged leaders, women who were acknowledged to have these skills for leading services. It was so successful, the Kolot Biktusha, with hundreds of women eventually joining. We then developed a Banot Biktusha for bat mitzvah girls who went through bat mitzvah, but those girls who were prepared to continue on serving the synagogue and demonstrating those skills that they had learned as they were training for the bat mitzvah. And then, because there were so many Kolot Biktusha members, but many of them were, while they were prepared to read Torah once in a while or on occasion, read or not read services, established Nashim Biktusha, which is an elite society within an elite society of women who were ready to read Torah or daven on the spot. And so there were three levels now, three subgroups within this Kolot Biktusha that that Women's League can now claim in its hundreds and hundreds of members of women who are liturgically knowledgeable. A number of the other things that Women's League has been very involved in the women's seders. As you know, many of you, I'm sure probably there isn't a single woman on this call who has not been to a women's seder. Again, this was the need to claim women's voices and place in the Exodus story, which if you read the Haggadah, you'd never think that women were even there. There is not a mention, while they don't mention Moshe, there's mentions of lots of rabbis, but there are no mentions of women everywhere. So at the women's seders, there is a real attempt to infuse the Passover ceremony, the Passover Seder, with women's experiences, women's voices, including the Kos Miriam and a number of other creative additions to the Passover Seder. Another one of the ceremonies that Women's League decided that they were going to encourage was the use of the mikvah. Now, the mikvah traditionally was used for the purpose of for women who were observing the laws of nidah, the separation of women from their husbands during their menstrual cycles and afterwards. But that, by and large, the mikvah for that purpose has been, I would say, mostly discontinued. Rabbi Ellen might want to contradict me on this, by women within the conservative movement. However, women have come to understand that the mikvah is important for a number of other issues, and have encouraged women, and many women have gone to the mikvah for a number of different kinds of ceremonies where they are going to feel the need to observe as you would with a separation. When you know, in the traditional sense, why women would go to the mikvah. Women go to the mikvah now, women who've suffered some kind of loss, a miscarriage, even women who've had abortions, women who've undergone some kind of trauma, the loss of a husband, a divorce. And the mikvah is seen as a form of renewal for women, a source of piety that is within traditional norms, but has been retooled with a modern understanding of what is its real spiritual qualities. And this was one of the things that Women's League was involved in, promoting various kinds of activities around the mikvah, modern activities around the mikvah.
Lisa, time check. It's
okay.
8:35.
Okay, Vashti's banquet. All right, we did this last time. You know, this Vashti's banquets were enormously successful in sisterhoods throughout the country. Again, this was the notion of reclaiming the Purim story for women to celebrate together with women in a way that women celebrate, and looking at all of the things that women do together, and that's what was going on at these banquets. Another one of the another tradition that Women's League has upgraded is the issue of the Ushpizot. As you know, the Ushpizot, the Ushpizim came from it was a Kabbalistic practice of inviting into the Sukkah all of these various men to come in on a daily basis, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and King David, and all of these men who would be invited each day of Sukkot to come and celebrate in the Sukkah with the family. And so at some point they sort of opined that if we were going to have ushpizot, we would invite, for example, we would invite some Jewish women into the sukkah. So the Kabbalists come up with a formula. Well, who might these women be? Well, they found an Agadah in the Gemara in Megillah 14b, and the Gemara asks, with regard to the prophetesses recorded, who might these 7 prophetesses be? And they answer Sarah, Miriam, Deborah, Hannah, Abigail, Huldah, and Esther, people I might call the usual suspects. And these were the traditional ushpizot that the Kabbalists might have invited if they were inclined to invite women into the Sukkah. However, Women's League in 2016 decided they were going to upgrade this to women who, real live women who made very important contributions to contemporary life. And you can see, I will identify them as you recognize Judith Houtman, who was probably the first female Talmudist in the United States. Judith Resnick, rest in peace, who an astronaut, a woman deeply committed to science. Paula Hyman, a member of Ezrat Nashim and a tremendous feminist historian. Judy Bloom, you will recognize for all of the work she did for children's literature, especially Little Girl. This woman needs no identification at all, nor does this woman. And this is also rest in peace, Debbie Friedman, who basically changed the nuance of contemporary Jewish music. Okay, now we're going to get to what I had alluded to a number at the very first session about how situations arise in which you're fortunate enough to have a president who will appear, who can sort of shepherd the organization through a period of trauma. And as I said, during World War II, when Women's League was basically, spending all of its time, rolling bandages, they could not have conferences. There was no way for women to connect. Doris Spiegel, who was then a very gifted Women's League president for many years, decided each year that they would set up at conferences around the country, because they couldn't get together for conventions because of the war. They would set up via telephone these kinds of communications where Doris Spiegel could speak to the women throughout the United States and, just continue to support them and nurture them and shore up and bolster their psyches and their energies and their strength because of this war that was raging in Europe. But as you know, what happened with the pandemic in 2020, which was incredibly traumatic, and basically starting in March, basically everything closed down, and Women's League had the president, Debbie Kaner Goldich, a longtime member of Women's League, very deeply dedicated to the movement, who was the president at that time. She, I had an interview with her, and I talked to her about this, and she said, it's really interesting because many of the things that we did during the pandemic were things that I wanted to do even had there not been a pandemic. It just so happened the things that I wanted to do were things that were that we could do along, in accordance with the pandemic. But Debbie came in and she had, I don't know if she had it actively in her head, but she had certainly internalized that that the mantra of our founder, Matilda Schechter, where in her opening speech to the for the establishment of Women's League for Conservative Judaism, she said we ought to study our own history, our literature, present day works of Jewish interest, and above all, we must familiarize ourselves again with our own Bible. And Debbie, as many women did, so internalized this mission of Matilda Schechter and was convinced that Women's League, even though this pandemic was going on and everyone was at home, that there was going to be a way that that Women's League was going to be able to keep its women engaged, and embarked upon a number of really extraordinary programs for Women's League for all of these women who are stuck at home. But thank God they now had this modern technology of this thing called Zoom. A few of you might have heard of this, and we're now able to connect with women at home. And some of the things that Women's League, that Debbie and Rabbi Ellen and a whole cadre of very hard workers, put together these programs to keep Women's League not only engaged, but to create a community of women learners. Whoops, sorry. Sorry about this. Oh boy. So the first thing that they decided to do, that Debbie told me, was there are many women in the organization who still didn't know how to read Hebrew. And they embarked upon this massive Hebrew literacy program. She said they had over 700 women learning to read Hebrew at all levels. This is not the program they used was a program by Noah Galinkin, the Hebrew Literacy Program, which is an amazing program. But they had women volunteers teaching other women how to read, women who had never read Hebrew. And as I said, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of women learned to read Hebrew during the pandemic. And because this had been so successful, a number of these women said, and this is obviously women who are of that generation where these kinds of opportunities had not been available to them, they embarked upon a 3-year bat mitzvah program where women studied for 3 years. And at the culmination of their 3 years of study, they had a bat mitzvah celebration at the convention in 2013, where women who heretofore had never known how to read Hebrew, didn't know, an aleph from a vav, now not only could daven, but could read Hebrew, a remarkable, remarkable feat that was accomplished at a time when women were stuck at home and not able to get out and go to their synagogues, or might not at that point had the inclination, but now the opportunity was presented to them to learn to read Hebrew, and in fact to have that bat mitzvah that many of them had not been able to have when they were younger. And I understand this was an incredible and emotionally rich celebration at the convention. A number of other things that Debbie talked about that they had done. They had this Makom B'Yachad, where women could get together for all different kinds of activities. They got together to study Mishnah, but Debbie said she told me they had programs for just every interest. They had women playing mahjong. They had women studying Talmud. They had some women studying Jewish history. And I understand Lois Silverman did a multi-part program on Jewish women in film. And in one of the introductions, I saw Rabbi Ellen come out and personally thank Lois Silverman. She said she had so many women at her last film production, her last film session, that she has actually keeping the website alive. And so she did a shout out to Lois Silverman, who for many, many, many sessions had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of women looking at films and understanding what does this film say about this Jewish woman or this Jewish situation. An extraordinary feat. So what Women's League did was, if you pardon the very trite expression, they took lemons and they made lemonade. And they opened the field of study, all kinds of opportunities for women to study. Many, many, many hundreds, if not thousands of women who were able to study. But the corollary to that, we can't forget this, and is an important part as the substance of the learning, is what Women's League did during this very crucial time in its history, was to create these communities of women who got to know each other across the country, who could connect with each other, who would share equal interests. And it was an extraordinary tour de force for Women's League to create all of these extraordinary learning opportunities and opportunities for the development of communities in their organization during a time when it could easily as easily have folded. So kol hakavod to all of those who participated in it, who led it, who nurtured it, etc. And so that's where I am going to leave my part of the presentation. What I hope that has come from this, and I sort of brought full circle the Matilda Schechter message. And I cannot emphasize, if you take nothing else away from these sessions, what you must take away from this session is that for over 100 years, unlike any other Jewish women's organization, Women's League is the only organization that maintained its mission of the education of its women from day one. All of the other Jewish women's organizations retooled themselves, but Women's League kept its eye on the ball, and periodically a new president would come in and would reimagine Matilda's vision. But nevertheless, that was the focus. And it was because of these educational opportunities that were available to women in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, that we now have so many Jewish women who are so Judaically and Hebraically knowledgeable. It's not because of their synagogues, it's because of Women's League. And all I can say is to all of you who have embraced this, participated in this, nurtured it, kol hakavod to all of you, and God bless. Thank you. So now I'm going to turn this over to Corey, because we're going to talk for a few minutes about where we're going.
Lisa, would you stop your share, please?
Yeah, I will. I will indeed. Let's see here. Hold on. I'm going to try to stop it.
Oh.
I'm trying to, my mouse,
There
oh,
you
here we
go.
go.
There you
There we
go.
go.
Okay.
My mouse wouldn't let me out.
Okay. So what do you think, Lisa? What's the future going to look like?
Well, one of the things I have learned is not to prognosticate, because every time I do, I'm wrong. But I do know that there's not a lot I can say, but as a historian, I can say that the best predictor of the future is to know the past. The best enhancer of the future. If you want to know where you're going, you must know your past. And so I think that one of the things that Women's League, the members of Women's League, need to do is to be constantly reminded of the importance of this mission and how fundamental it has been in our development. and how fundamental it is in the preservation of Judaism as we want to see it, as we are hoping to see it in our children, in our grandchildren, in our synagogues, in our communities, and that those of us who are carrying these lessons are going to be the warriors for it. And I think that what we need to see is to women embrace this very storied history and to carry it forward in whatever iteration they choose to do it, whether it's in literacy, whether it's in reading Jewish poetry, whether it's in watching Jewish films, whether it's being an activist for immigrants, or an activist for Israel, or an activist for um, reproductive rights, that let our Judaism inform what we love, what we embrace, and help us to carry it forward. And I think that's all we can hope for, is that women will continue to appreciate and honor this past history, and want and see it as one of their primary goals to perpetuate it in however they choose to do it.
Would you're welcome to unmute yourself and talk a little bit about what you see for the future. Anybody would like to share?
I'd love to hear from some of you, actually.
Well, I'm
Could you?
glad to share. Like Lisa, my high school friend, I did not come. I came from a history and background with a father who died when he was 41, and my mother married an atheist. And my grandmother came from Russia and was Orthodox and renounced Orthodoxy and became a feminist. And so there were lots of parts to our family. And one of the things that I have loved since I had my own children, and their bar mitzvahs and learning the prayers and learning Hebrew along the way, I have felt that um, uh, that the importance of today and what Lisa brought forward was the importance of understanding one's past. I mean, we can always deal with what is uh, in this moment, but it's very, very relevant to say, where did we come from, and why am I thinking the way I'm thinking now? And of what benefit is the past? What is it offering us? And so I feel that I'm an officer at NCJW Michigan. And so a lot of things that Lisa ended with, whether it's Women's League or another Jewish organization, we work on reproductive rights. We work on all of the things that she mentioned. But that said, I was not familiar with Women's League until my dear friend Lisa said, guess what? I'm going to be speaking. And I've listened in, and I just have learned a real lot. So I thank her, you, Lisa, and I thank all of you for offering this to us.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you,
Anyone
Barb.
else?
Thanks, Barb.
Anybody else want to share what they see in the future, or how this is affected? Yeah, Gay?
I'm part of Bet Torah in Mount Kisco, New York, and we do an annual Sisterhood Shabbat. And this year I was asked to present a Devar Torah. So I spoke to the chair and I said, I would like to connect Bet Torah Sisterhood with Women's League, as this is our 90th anniversary of affiliation with Women's League. And so I traced the timeline. Okay, there is in archives a timeline. And I picked certain things: Israel, Sisterhood, Shabbat, the Judaic Isha, and different categories. But I started with in the early 1900s at the Hebrew congregation in Mount Kisco. A bunch of women splintered off and formed a women's group. And in the 90 years, they fundraised, provided Jewish education in a very small community with the guidelines of Women's League. And so I did, different years, and it's a big project, but I felt it was very important to see the beginnings and where we were in 2025. In my synagogue, my sisterhood, the women do the whole service, everything. And it's taken a number of years for when the first Aliyah, when women were counted in Minyan, and I just tracked the history. But I also thought it was important to trace Women's League connection to Israel. So if you're asking what I see the future, I think that that's the important thing. You have to look back and see how you began and the journey, the Jewish journey to where you are today and what you want for the future.
So if we look back a little bit on how we did it, then, whenever the then is, but if we go back 120 years or not, and how we do it today, it's still the same. And I think Lisa's point was just beautifully stated. It's the same mission. We just do it differently.
I just want, yeah. Can I just add one thing to the Women's League Shabbat, which I find fascinating? There are probably many of you on this call who remember the Women's League Shabbat in 1960s, 1970s. You know what they were like? The Women's League Shabbat in the 1960s and 1970s, 50s, 60s, the women would come, their husbands would have the aliyahs, their husbands would get up and daven. The only thing that the women could actually do for Women's League Shabbat was they would let them get up and read a couple non-liturgical prayers or non-liturgical readings. But the irony is that the Women's League Shabbat was really the husbands of Women's League members Shabbat. That's what they were. And so this is one of the real changes so when you talk about how Women's League Shabbat has changed over the years, this is a very stark representation of that.
Thank you, Lisa. Geraldine, did you want to speak?
Debbie Lempertz had her hand up.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
Corey, you have a
Okay.
couple people with hands up.
Okay. Debbie, go ahead.
I mean, I know how special this group is, but to really hear the history, to understand how we're connected from such incredible, strong history, it's hard to see who we are when we're in it. But to see who we are looking back is really incredible. Thank you for your hard work.
Thank you. Thank you. Marcia Topple? Your hand's up?
Yeah,
Marcia?
my hand is up. Okay.
Okay.
What I'm recalling, of course, the statement, we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. And there's a lot of women on this particular screen tonight, some of whom have been my mentors, Corey being one, some with whom I have worked, Marion Mole and Myra Promisel, go back a few years, Carol Simon. I know I'm dating myself, but it's okay. What I said, and this picks up on what Lisa said also, and Lisa, who has been my teacher and my mentor for many years. I recall the change in Women's League on how I was listed and recognized over the years as a member of Women's League. And I was sisterhood president in the mid-70s. So that gives you an idea of how far back I go. But I was then known as Mrs. Harold Topple. I did not have a name. I was Mrs. Harold Topple. And then as years went by, I was Mrs. Harold Topple with Marcia in parentheses. Then I graduated and I was Mrs. Marcia Topple with Harold in parentheses. Some of you are laughing, but you know it's true because that's the way it was listed. It wasn't until, I don't know how recently, but it was, relatively recently in my
It was
Women's League
1980, it was
career
1982,
that
It was-
I finally got a name. That I was Marcia Topple. And then we lost the Mrs. somewhere along the line. But it was that long until I got my own name. And I think that that's a remarkable accomplishment in the progression of how we became important in our own right.
If,
You know-
if,
you know,
thank you,
thank-
Marcia. If you listen to Bernice Balters or
yeah.
read her interview, which is on the archives section of the website,
Yeah.
she was the one who came
Yes.
to Women's League and was her secretary typed a letter and it was Mrs. Shlomo Balter. And she, well, he's not even here.
Yeah.
Here. Anyway, listen to the interview. It's very.
I will.
I was also taken by that when she said, "Why is Shlomo's name on this letter? He's got nothing to do with this letter."
Right.
But the other thing that Bernice did, which is I think many of you don't realize this, is up until that point, women who did work for Women's League and who created things, their names were never on them. It was just came out, it was put out by Women's League. So if Marcia Topple was the chair of something, or if she had created something, it was her work it went unacknowledged. And so that was also one of the fundamental changes in Women's League. Not only did women were they given their own identity, but they were now given ownership of their work, which is also that's an enormous step, an enormous sociological step. So thanks, Marcia, Mrs. Harold, Mrs. Harold.
Geraldine or Rabbi, either one.
Carolyn,
Rabbi?
you want to go first?
Geraldine, do you want to go first?
I'm going to yield to Rabbi Ellen since she's been there longer than I have, and she is an upper echelon of government here.
No, it's okay. Thank you. But what I wanted to say was that I think it's really important that where Women's League is now is that we don't all have husbands or spouses. People have wives. People are single. And we have to recognize that not everyone is white. I mean, everyone's different. Everyone has a different sexuality. Quite frankly, we also say you have to identify as a woman. I'm not checking anybody. We're not going to do that. You identify as a woman. You identify in the Jewish community. You're part of Women's League. That was one thing I wanted to say. The other part I wanted to say was thank you very much for doing all of this, both Lisa and Corey. And that I think it's really important to think about just the quality of our name. Is Women's League for conservative Judaism, not of conservative Judaism, but for conservative Judaism. You all will read something that I'm going to write eventually because it's my pet peeve. When people don't call us by the right name, I can actually name our members' websites that don't have the name, but it's so important that we are for conservative Judaism. Think about our Torah Fund. Our designated philanthropy is for the perpetuation of conservative Judaism by supporting our seminaries and helping all of that. And it really helps the future by helping Torah Fund, by promoting ourselves and boasting. And the programming that we did during COVID, which was actually Margie Miller was the original president in March 2020, and then Debbie became president July 2020. So there was a few months of both of 2020 of the pandemic that we had two presidents going on, and many educational people. Barbara Ezring was one of the education people at the time, was education, and then Torah Fund, and Ellen Bresnick helped with that too, and Julia helped during part of when she wasn't president before that. So there are many people to credit that we came together for conservative Judaism, and I think that we have to remember that we have a great, wonderful past, and to remember the future, we need to also perpetuate our membership in Women's League. And if we have friends who aren't members yet, bring them in. We want them as sisterhood affiliates, but of course also individual members as well are also always welcomed. And it's good to see where we have come from as we continue on to the future as well. So thank you, Lisa, again. Geraldine, you still,
Okay,
your hand
Gerald
is up.
and Denise, and then we'll close because I don't want to keep you too late.
I
Geraldine?
want you all to brace yourselves for a minute for what I have to say. History is important, not only to see the accomplishments, but to also look to see where we don't have certain people. And Rabbi just kind of mentioned that. And I think that for the future, we need to be more inclusive. Not everything is about your husband and your children, no harm taken, but we have a diverse population that wants to come in, that want to be a part, but you have to be open and receptive to that. Whether it's before casual conversations or whatever. I don't have a problem telling you who I am. I think you know that. But many people do have a problem, and they may not feel comfortable being in the organization. And we need folks. We need diversity in play if we are going to really grow and sustain. So that's all I got to say.
Thank you, Geraldine.
Thank you, Geraldine.
Denise?
Well, I was part of that bat mitzvah class that you talked about, the original. And when I first started, I did it because I wanted to learn Hebrew. I am a Jew by choice, and I don't know how many other women are a Jew by choice. But I got to tell you that I've always felt, I always say this, I feel like I'm behind the 8 ball because I don't have all the history that all of you have. I didn't grow up Jewish. And I'm constantly trying to learn and absorb more of it. And being part of Women's League has helped me become a better Jew. I've learned so much from all these different programs and all the women that I've met. And Makom Biachad, I don't know what I'd do without that. Everybody should come to that. It's just wonderful. So I would like to see all of this continue and draw in more Jews of choice. I think there are more of us out here than anybody realizes. I've got a friend who's actually, she was born Jewish, but she's going to become a single member of an individual member of Women's League just because of what she's seen go on with us. So I thank you, and this was a great program. I enjoyed every bit of it. So thank you.
I just
Thank
have one
you.
final comment. I just aired. I see my third Trojan sister out here. Barbara Citron is out here also. So all of the Trojan women are here tonight. I'm so thrilled. So thrilled.
I'm going to end this because I like to respect people's time. And first, of course, I want to thank Lisa. You have been an amazing teacher. You have led us to a greater understanding of the past, present, and future of Women's League. Through these sessions, you have provided us with a powerful tool, the knowledge and understanding and pride of our past, a tool that will help us navigate the future. As James Baldwin said, if you know whence you came, there are absolutely no limitations to where you can go. It has been such a pleasure working with you, and I am so grateful for the many, many, many hours you have gifted us to prepare this fabulous series. From my heart, and I'm sure from all of us, Toda Rabbah. So,
Well, thank you. You know something? I thank you all because it's a gift to be able to do this. It really is. It is. Keeps my blood flowing. As you can see, you see the bookshelf behind me on my counter. Can you see behind me? There are no books on it. Maybe one of these days you'll see some books on it.
so what's next? Thank you, Lisa. So what's next? Within the next week or so, I will be emailing each of you of a link to the video of tonight's session. Videos of all 4 parts will be available on the archive section of WLCJ.org. And all you have to do at the homepage, you don't even have to sign in, is just search A League of Our Own. And please take some time to enjoy and learn from the archive section of Women's League's website. There is so much information from our past that can be utilized to instruct our future. Not only that, there are lots of laughs and smiles and joy in every one of the materials there. And we've talked about some of them tonight, that wonderful interview with Bernice Balter, the Garland of Grace, which is a video of highlighting the presidents of Women's League. Lots and lots of stuff. Give yourself a treat. Explore www.wlcj.org/archives and be proud you are a part of this fabulous organization and its accomplishments. Thank you for joining us tonight, and for many of you for joining us for the whole series. Keep in touch. Let us know how you have been impacted by and shared our discoveries. So I wish you good night, and it's been a pleasure serving as your host for this series. And again, many, many thanks to Lisa and to all of you. Have a good evening.
Lisa,
night.
I
Thank
have
you,
your book
Cory
on
and
my
Lisa.
bookshelf.
Thank you, thank you,
Hey,
thank you.
Lisa.
I have your book on my
Don't
bookshelf.
forget, tomorrow at 12 o'clock.
Try it out. It's great.
What's
Thank
tomorrow?
you.
Macomb Yachad.
Lisa, good to see you.
Good to see all
Thank
of you.
Lisa. Thank you,
All
Thank
my
Cory.
you.
buddies,
Cory.
Schaefer and Faye, and all
My
my
pleasure.
buddies out there. Yeah.
Thank you, Cory. Thank you, Lisa. Wonderful.
Carol Simon.